A destitute farmer inherited a broken ranch until his daughter uncovered a $100 million secret. Amos Reed counted the last $12 in his calloused hands when a sound broke the silence of their Nevada farmhouse. Scout scratching at the door with a yellowed envelope in his jaws. Lila froze. The return name was one Amos had never heard. Ezekiel Holt. Inside, a deed to a 200-acre ranch no one had spoken of in decades, and a single chilling note written in black ink that had bled into the paper fibers. Find what I couldn't carry where the lone cedar stands. The farmhouse leaned like a drunk in the heat, paint curling, windows cracked. The desert beyond rippled with mirages, as if the land itself wanted to keep its secrets buried. Lila tilted the letter toward the light, her voice quivering. Ezekiel somehow knew about Amos's debts, his failing farm, even the exact sum he owed the bank. But Ezekiel died before Amos was born. How could a dead man know the ruin of a future he never lived to see? Scout barked toward the horizon where a single cedar bent against the wind, its shadow long and crooked across the scorched earth. Lila clutched her father's arm, eyes wide with a mix of fear and hope. Amos whispered, "This is no gift. It's a warning. What waits beneath that tree is bigger than land, older than debts, and darker than any secret Amos ever imagined. And what Lila uncovers there will make you question everything about legacy, luck, and fate. Stick around, you won't believe what's buried under that cedar." The wagon rattled off the last ridge and stopped beside a fence, bleached the color of bone. Amos Reed climbed down, joints aching after hours across Nevada's dusty plains, and helped 16-year-old Lila step onto the baked ground. Heat shimmered above cracked earth like a glass sheet, bending the horizon until sky and dirt blurred. Ahead stood the ranch they had come to claim. A listing farmhouse with paint peeling and curled ribbons, window panes shattered, a porch sagging toward dust, and a barn creaking in the dry wind. Even the shadows looked tired. Scout trotted a wide circle, nose low, tail high, reading scents, as if the land were a ledger only he could audit. Amos unlatched the gate, and they walked in with the careful pace people bring to places that have outlived their owners. The yard offered fragments of a story: a frayed rope, a dented bucket, half full of sand, a horseshoe sunk near the step, and a rusted pulley that turned and whispered to itself. Every board talked, settling, complaining, remembering. The ride had chewed them down to silence. The mule chose stubborn zigzags whenever the road offered a straight line, and the sun had burned through the last cool held by morning. Lila wiped sweat from her brow and studied the house with a look that mixed worry and invitation. The place seemed to weigh them from a distance, then again up close, like a judge considering two strangers with the same last name as the accused. Up close, the porch showed wounds. Nails sat proud on dry boards. Glass lay in a corner like rock sugar, and a torn screen hung from a bent staple. Near the steps, a squat rusted tin rested in a slice of shade as if someone had kicked it there and forgotten it. Lila nudged the tin with her boot and heard a dull clink. She crouched, brushed grit away, and worked the lid loose. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay a hand-drawn map on waxed paper, its black lines crisp against a pale field. Symbols marked a rough rectangle of land, a circle with 3 spokes, a pierced square, a spiral that widened from a tight center, and a small cross that could have been a survey stake. Folded beside the map sat a heavy iron key tied with a strip of faded twine, and a photograph of a man who looked so much like Amos that Scout whined and pressed his shoulder to Lila's knee. The date under the image read night. Amos looked again. He had been born 2 years later. The math made no sense, and yet the face carried unmistakable kinship. The same jawline, the same wary eyes, the same mouth set against hardship. Lila held the photo beside his cheek, comparing angles with a steadiness that shook him in a different way than fear. He rubbed the map's legend with his thumb and read faint labels: Northwell, Winter Corral, Storm Gully, Cedar Rise. Whoever drew it had a patient hand. He picked up the key and felt a weight press a bruise into his palm. Imagined iron teeth meeting iron, a bolt sliding with a small sound that belongs to locks yielding after long refusals. The barn let out a soft complaint as the wind shifted and tin clicked against old nails. A swallow stitched a quick arc through a missing board and vanished into cool shade. Lila folded the map, slipped the key into her pocket, and stood. "If that cedar is on here," she said, "we should check it first." Amos followed her gaze across the field. Far out, a lone cedar bent a little, stubborn and green against a sea of dun. Heat made the distance look watery, but a faint path ran there and back again, as if someone had worn it by returning often and keeping quiet about why. Scout burst forward and Lila hurried after him. Amos shouldered the tin and came on with a measured stride that hid nerves poorly. They crossed hard pan crazed by thin fissures that laced the ground like old scars. Baked crust pinged where it bridged shallow hollows. Lila stepped around a snakeweed clump and a lizard shot away under a stone. Near the cedar, the air cooled a degree and smelled of resin and dust. The trunk bulged where soil had settled away from roots. Cut into the bark ran a series of clean lines, the very signs printed on them. Higher up, in a heart no bigger than Amos's palm, 2 letters flanked a plus sign, E.H. and M. Lila traced the grooves with a finger and looked at him. Ezekiel Holt and Miriam Reed, she said. Amos stared until the letters blurred. He had not said his mother's full name aloud in years. Miriam had died when he was 10, after a cold season that ground everything down. She had told stories of nights that smelled like rain and showed him how to plant beans in patient rows. She had never mentioned a man named Ezekiel. Mr. was his mother. E.H. could only be the stranger from the envelope. Scout barked at the base of the tree and pawed at a scab of dirt, as if urging them to see what he could smell. Lila matched each carved sign to the map, checking orientation by sun and ridgeline. The cedar marks the center, she murmured, and from here the measures spread like spokes. She pointed toward the barn and then toward a small rise beyond it. Amos crouched and touched the heart again. The cut edges had calloused, but lines still held depth. Whoever carved them had returned more than once, adding and retracing. The idea felt heavy. Marks like these take time and belief. Wind worked the limbs until they whispered, and the sound mingled with a distant metallic clap from the barn. Amos rose and looked back at the house with the inventory of a man forced to weigh everything. The porch needed jacking. The roof lines sagged. The pump would seize if wrenched without oil. Yet the place carried gravity he could feel standing among dry roots and rattling cones. He tried to put the man from the photograph inside those rooms and heard a chair scrape and boots cross planks in his mind. Then reality elbowed in with a familiar shove. Their small farm back home sat 1 letter away from foreclosure. A bank officer had recited interest, penalties, and dates with the calm of someone reading a weather report that wrecked only other men's crops. The final notice rode in his wallet, folded flat and worn at the corner. The feed store had closed its tap. A neighbor had offered to buy the last tractor at a price that would have been a favor only to the buyer. The truck coughed warnings each morning, and sometimes refused to start until the 3rd try. Lila read his face the way she always had. "We came all this way," she said, steady, "so let's not turn around because the door looks rough. House first." Her curiosity moved between them like a current and carried him forward. "House first," he said, "then barn, then we walk the lines and see if the marks match the ground." Scout trotted ahead as if he approved the order and planned to grade their work. They crossed back over the field and climbed the steps. The screen stuck and then surrendered with a cough of dust. Inside the threshold, the floorboards cupped like parched tongues and broken glass crackled underfoot. The hallway smelled of dry wood, mouse trace, and something faintly sweet, like old soap. Sunlight fell in angled bars through shattered panes and painted the air with bright scratch. "Stay close," Amos said, though she already was, and he tested each board with his heel before placing weight. They moved room to room like divers through a wreck. In the kitchen, a stove squatted with its door ajar, ash drifted across the floor, and a rusted kettle sat abandoned on a cold ring. A row of jars kept watch on a shelf, labels ghosted by light. In the parlor, a toppled bookcase spread mildewed paper, and a child's marble lay under a chair leg, half swallowed by dust. A cracked mirror caught Amos's reflection and warped it into the man from the photograph. Lila paused near a window where a breeze teased a faded curtain. Along the baseboard, a nail head shone brighter than its neighbors. "Different," she murmured. She worked her pocket knife under the edge and teased up a plank. Wood lifted with a sigh like held breath leaving a chest. Beneath waited an empty cavity lined with oilcloth worn smooth at the corners. A dark rectangle printed there suggested something that once sat snug, removed in either haste or ritual. Amos examined edges and surrounding boards. In one corner, a smudge of wax matched the map's coding. Whoever hid things here had a method. On the mantel, a thin strip of clean wood broke the dust where an object had stood. Beside it sat a jar holding 3 buttons, 2 feed receipts, and a foreign coin greened by neglect. Lila turned the coin in her palm, studied the worn relief, and slipped it into the tin for safekeeping. Somebody loved coins, she said, half to herself, or hated bank. They searched the pantry where shelves bowed under the weight of empty jars,
Then the back bedroom where a mattress had collapsed into springs. In a closet, a hanger held a moth-eaten jacket that still carried the ghost of tobacco. A ceramic basin on a washstand gleamed under dust like a pale moon. A trunk with a busted hasp held a folded quilt and a scrap of newspaper that mentioned a drought year in small type. Each object felt like a breadcrumb left by hands that expected to return. Outside again, the wind rocked the barn doors, which banged once and settled into a long creak. Amos shaded his eyes and studied the ridge beyond, where the spiral on the map seemed to point. Faint tracks climbed in a wavering line and disappeared into scrub. He imagined hidden markers waiting there and felt the prickle that announces a path chosen without certainty. Lila looked from the ridge to the porch and then to the cedar. "We should finish the rooms before the light slides," she said, "because there could be more compartments. A ledger, names." Amos rolled his shoulders and made his mind work like a carpenter planning tasks, instead of a debtor tallying due. The plan steadied him. Sweep every space, list each oddity, match symbol to spot, and keep moving even when questions pressed from all sides. Even with that order set, unease bled through. The photograph dated 1985 suggested timelines that refused ordinary sense. The initials on the living bark tied his mother to a man she never named. The map's symbols promised intention, distance, and buried labor. The key, heavy in Lila's pocket, waited with a mute patience that felt almost like a dare. Amos touched the tin, then the wallet that carried the bank's last warning, and weighed whether destiny was calling or desperation had dressed itself in mystery. Lila closed the map and set her hand on his arm. "If this place holds answers," she said, "we have to look, even if it holds more questions." Her voice made the air feel thinner and easier to breathe. Scout thumped his tail against the jam like a metronome. Outside, the cedar's shadow reached toward the porch like the hand of a sundial, marking a moment that would not return. Amos listened to the barn creak, to the pulley whisper, to the rasp of grasshoppers, and felt he'd nip at the back of his neck. The house did not feel friendly, but it did not feel empty either. It felt paused, as if waiting for the right question. He remembered Miriam's quiet laugh and the way she tucked a stray hair when leafing through seed catalogs. She had loved stubborn land, and she had hidden hurt. She had not told him about Ezekiel. He looked from the photo to the carved heart he could picture, through the doorway gap, then to the map that stitched buildings and gullies together, and to the key that promised a lock still to be found. The bank wanted a signature, and then his field. This ranch offered symbols, a dead man's knowledge, and a narrow road out of a corner. Lila lifted the flashlight and flashed a grin with a fierce spark that belonged to people who believe puzzles exist to be solved. "Let's search the house," she said, and her insistence spread like fire in dry grass until Amos felt it in his chest. He nodded and let the moment write itself on the inside of his mouth like a vow. If this inheritance held a way forward, they would find it. If it held teeth, they would find those too. On the threshold, with Scout between them and the heat still pressing, Amos wondered if this inheritance was a lifeline or a trap.
Heat pressed on the back of Amos Reed's neck as he stepped deeper into the crumbling ranch house, where dust hung in slanted light and cobwebs stitched doorframes. Lila swept a flashlight through the dim, finding corners the sun could not reach. Outside, the noon glare burned white. Inside, the air barely moved, and sweat stung Amos's eyes as the sun baked the warped floorboards. Scout tapped in behind them, sniffed, sneezed, then settled, ears high. They worked room by room, lifting brittle rugs, tapping baseboards, and testing vents with a pocket knife from a kitchen drawer. A cracked mirror warped Amos's reflection into someone leaner and more tired. Lila crouched by a south window where light cut a bright line along the floor. She ran her fingernail across a seam. A papery hiss answered. She levered gently and a board came up with a sigh, as if the house had been holding its breath. Below, a shallow cavity waited, lined with oilcloth. A bundle sat inside, leather the color of strong coffee. Lila lifted it, and the smell of hide and dust rose like a memory. She untied the knot and opened the cover. Loops leaned forward across the first page. A hurried hand. She read softly. "If you're reading this, then time already chose you." Amos took the book and turned a page with care. Names appeared like guideposts. Miriam, Amos, Ezekiel. Margins held small sketches. A cedar limb with a scar, a fence post notched thrice, a rock shaped like a kneeling man, each tagged with distances that matched their map. Then a sentence pressed so hard the ink bled. Miriam said Amos would need this more than us. Amos rubbed the words with his thumb, as if warmth could raise meaning. He read on while Lila steadied the beam. Ezekiel wrote about weather and loss. then shifted to a ledger voice that counted value without apology. He listed auctions and prices, dealers who could be trusted, and men whose offers came fast and low. One line snapped into focus. 1933 Double Eagle sold for $2 million. Another entry paired coins with coordinates that matched the Cedar's symbols, each cash tied to a distance and bearing, as if the ranch itself held a vault beneath every landmark. Between columns, Ezekiel turned back to blood. I promised my sister the boy would have a way when drought and debt cornered him. Below in smaller script, if I fail, the land will finish what I began. Amos closed his eyes and saw Miriam's hands sorting seed and smoothing sheet. She had taught him to repair a fence in the wind, and when to quit a field before it ruined the man who worked it. She had never said the name Ezekiel Holt. He knew us, Amos whispered. Lila leaned into him. Feels like he's still here, she said. They flipped to a page boxed in charcoal. Don't trust men who arrive too quickly with clean boots and straight answers, the note warned. They bring contracts like snares. Amos thought of the bank office, and red squares circling dates that owed him. Hope lifted and fear answered until the two braided. Lila teased open a paper pocket and slid out a clipped dealer list. Another held a timetable from a railroad that no longer ran. A third released a scrap that smelled faintly of metal. Count paces from the Cedar at noon, never in the wind. On a later sheet, Ezekiel's hands softened. Keep going even when it hurts. Amos's throat tightened. He was writing to us, he said, surprised to hear his voice sound younger. Heat deepened. The light outside shifted from white to brass, and dust turned the yard into a shimmer. Inside, the air tasted of old wood and patience. Amos read a passage that felt like the present tense. I watched them from the hill this morning, the girl and her father moving with the care of people who have nothing left to drop. The date printed above the line made no sense. Both looked toward the doorway as if the house might answer. Scout's claws clicked once, then stilled. Amos closed the book and held it against his chest. The leather felt warm, a living thing. The ledger in his wallet still waited. The feed store still wanted cash. The truck still coughed before it agreed to work. Yet the lines in Ezekiel's hand made a narrow road through ruin. He spoke low, unwilling to jar whatever kindness had found them. We use this, he said. We don't waste a gift. Lila nodded, wrapped the oilcloth around the book, and slid it into the tin with the map, the key in the photo so nothing traveled alone. Her voice softened. Ever felt a loved one watching over you? Share your story in the comments. The words hung in the hush, like a bell tone that settled rather than faded. Scout exploded into barking. The sound shot through the doorway, bright and urgent, then wheeled back. Lila froze. Amos squinted through lacework crack. Far down the track, a chalky plume rose in pulses that matched engines straining in low gear. Not wind, not a dust devil, more than one vehicle. Someone's coming, he said. They moved without waste. Lila lowered the lifted board, pressed it flat with both palms, then rolled the rug back into place. Amos ground dust into the seam with his hand until the line vanished. He tucked the tin under his jacket and felt the weight settle along his ribs like a square promise. Back way, he said. Barn first, then the Cedar's shade. If they're decent, we'll know. Lila touched the key in her pocket and the corner of the photograph as if they were charms. They slipped through the kitchen and into a lean-to where sunlight fell in a shattered grid. From the rear, the yard looked wider. The Cedar closer, its shadow a dark blade on bright ground. The dust plume thickened and split. 3 notes in the engine hum told Amos there were at least that many trucks. How long? Lila asked. Minutes, Amos. She drew a breath that steadied her mouth. Then we look like people with nothing to hide, she replied. You were born for hard ground, he said. They crossed to the barn. Amos slid the door just enough to enter, then paused for his sight to adjust. A tool chest sat under a bench. He eased the lid and found wrenches, wire and a hammer with a smooth handle. He nested the tin in the deepest corner and set the hammer on top, as if the arrangement had always been there. If we run, he said, we circle back after dark. Lila nodded and pointed toward the Cedar. Engines downshifted and fell to idle. Voices carried too low for words, close enough that intention rode the tone. The barn door trembled in the heat. Tin rattled once. Scout planted himself between them in the light, shoulders squared above a rumble. Amos took Lila's hand and remembered the warning about men with straight answers and spotless boots. He breathed once and stepped toward the glare to meet whatever the dust was bringing. Victor Crane arrived in a ribbon of dust with 4 horsemen and a smile that never reached his eyes. His hat square, his boots immaculate, a leather folio under one arm stamped with a silver logo. Horizon Land Ventures. He slid from the saddle with the lightness of a man who never carried posts, lifted 2 fingers in a tidy greeting, and studied the yard as if cataloging a minor asset. "Afternoon," he said, smooth as lacquer. "Victor Crane. Congratulations on your windfall. I'm here to make this simple." He opened the folio and produced a contract thick with seals. $60,000 for your worthless ranch cashier's check today. We assume all liability, code headaches, taxes, and the whole migraine. You walk away clean. Amos Reed kept the sun to his back. Measuring the cadence and the boots, Lila stood at his shoulder with scout pressed close, jaw set, eyes on Crane's hands. Crane's gaze slid over the porch, the leaning roofline, the sagging steps, then paused on the faint outline of a tin corner bulging beneath Amos's jacket, before floating back to his smile, a bargain for both sides. He continued, "We buy puzzle pieces others overlook. You're spared upkeep and county clerks. Everybody wins." Amos said, "That's quick math for a place you call worthless." Crane chuckled. "Worthless in portfolio language, not as a personal judgment. Words can be cruel in boardrooms." He tapped the page. "This is a civilized exit. News travels," Crane added. "A letter, a deed, a distant relative. Small towns hum. Amazing you arrived so fast." He rolled the word relative like a coin. Lila stood a fraction closer. "What does Horizon see here?" Amos asked. "Aggregation," Crane replied. "A strip that helps us stitch power, water, and right-of-way. You won't enjoy the labyrinth. We're built for it." He held out a pen. 60 today. Lila looked down at Crane's boots. No burrs, no mud. And then at the riders whose jeans wore salt and grit. "We haven't decided," she said. Crane dipped his hat. "Take an hour," he said. "I'll be in the shade pretending patience." He moved to the porch post. The riders kept their horses pointed toward the cedar. Amos and Lila ducked into the house as if going for water and moved to the kitchen, where the oilcloth packet waited beneath a flour bin. Lila opened Ezekiel's journal to the page she had marked and read, barely above a breath. "The cedar marks the center, 30 paces north, 20 west, 6 feet down." They slipped out the back, keeping the house between themselves and Crane, and crossed the yard where grit rasped under soles and heat pressed like a weight. Amos measured 30 north with a carpenter's steadiness, then turned and took 20 west. Lila set a flat stone on the spot and fetched the spade they had leaned against the trunk. The ground resisted, then fractured. Amos lifted soil in plates. Lila scooped and brushed edges clean. The spade rang against metal, a muffled clang as if sound had been packed away with the rest of the secret. They cleared corners and found a steel box nested in an earthen cradle, paint scoured off by time, seams reinforced, lid inset with a dial and twin keyway. Amos tested the edge and felt mass argue back. "Too heavy to lift," he said. Lila tried anyway, then sat back. "We'll need the jack and a sled." From the porch a soft clap echoed as if a folio had been shut with satisfaction. Crane leaned in the shade and pretended indifference, while his eyes measured the distance from tree to door and from stubborn family to opportunity. "He knows," Lila whispered. "He suspects," Amos answered. Crane strolled toward them with the unhurried confidence of a man who signed away other people's choices for a living. His riders shifted to give him a clean line of approach. "Ingenious to use a cedar on barren ground," he observed, stopping at a courteous distance. "Hands open. My crew can move that crate to safe storage. You can evaluate it without heat stroke or county lectures." "We'll manage," Amos said. The smile on Crane's face held, but something thinned behind it. 60 is a kindness," he said. "Tomorrow it is 50. Sunlight erodes value." Lila stood, interposing her shadow between Crane and the dial. "We aren't negotiating blind," she said. "Nor am I," Crane replied. "Horizon has followed filings here for years. Your relatives saved this patch from taxes more than once. We keep an eye on deeds that wake up." Amos felt the house, the debt, the road behind them, and the future pressing from every side. He put a hand on the box, palm hot. "We're not signing." Crane's gaze drifted to the bulge beneath Amos's jacket again, lingered, then moved to the carved heart on the trunk. EH plus MR before returning to their faces with a pleasant emptiness. "Family history is touching," he said. "But banks don't accept sentiment. Men who hesitate lose what little they have." Lila's voice carried just enough steel. "Ever faced someone too eager to take what's yours? Tell us below." The sentence settled like a chalk line. Amos slid a board under one corner to mask the outline, then brushed loose soil over the edge. "Jack, rope,
Skids, he said quietly. Barn, now. Crane tilted his head, hearing strategy in the cadence, if not the words. Let me help, he said. No charge for neighbors. We'll pass, Amos replied. Crane glanced toward the road, then at the horizon where light trembled above a distant ridge. You may be short on time, he said. A low engine note rolled across the flats, a bass vibration that grew and split into several throats as vehicles climbed the last slope. Earlier dust had announced horses. Now grimmier dust announced trucks. Crane's mouth barely moved, yet satisfaction seeped through the tiny change. Out here, he murmured, people misunderstand enterprise. It helps to have witnesses. We'll risk misunderstanding, Amos said, rising. Lila closed the journal and tucked it deep inside her jacket until the leather warmed against her ribs. She looked at the tree, the box, the man in the shade, then met her father's eyes. Resolve flickered between them. They would drag the weight into shadow, bolt the barn from within, and wait for dark if they had to. They would not hand over a century of planning for a cashier's check. And a smile. The engines grew louder, and then cut to idle beyond the ridge. Crane set his hat back on his head. Last chance to make this painless, he said. Amos felt the old ache of work and worry pass through him, and leave something steadier. We're not afraid of pain, he answered. Lila braced the shovel like a staff. Scout's growl deepened. Heat pressed hard, resin scented the air. Dust drifted in sheets while the hawk carved circles over the ridge. And watched them below. The yard narrowed to the shadow under the branches, the stubborn rectangle in the ground, a father's breath keeping rhythm, a daughter's stance that did not bend, and a stranger's patience honed thin as a blade.
The Nevada sun was sliding low, its glare bleeding into a furnace red that painted the desert sky like fire across steel. Amos Reed stood with one palm pressed against the cedar's trunk, the other clenched tight near the buried box, his shirt damp with sweat and grit. Lila hovered at his side, fists balled, Scout growling low at her feet. Around them, Victor Crane's men closed in, rifles slung with casual menace, boots crunching over parched soil. Dust rose from their circling, as if the earth itself had joined in the noose. Crane advanced slowly, his hat tipped just enough to shield his sharp eyes from the dying light, his smile too polished to belong in such a raw place. He gestured toward the steel box half unearthed by their digging. You found what my company has been tracing for 20 years, Ezekiel Holt's legacy. A coin collection worth over $100 million. Horizon tracked rumors, followed estate whispers, bribed clerks, and finally, here we are. The only thing standing between us and history's greatest private collection is your cooperation. Amos straightened, dust streaking his face, his body squared against the men. That box is mine by blood, he said. Crane lifted a manicured finger, wagging it with mock patience. Not without my help. These coins are worthless in the dirt. To sell them legally, to reach auction blocks where they bring millions, you need signatures, a chain of ownership, and notarized filings. I can grant that. 60% for you, 40% for Horizon. A fair partnership. He drew a contract from his folio, already bearing the seal of his company. One stroke of your pen and the future changes. Lila whispered, sharp but hushed. Don't trust him. Her eyes had caught details. Ropes in burlap sacks stacked near their saddlebags. Coils prepared with knots too deliberate for hauling supplies. The intent was darker. Bind, carry, disappear. Amos followed her gaze and his gut hardened. He stared straight into Crane's gleam. You need me alive, don't you? My name's the one that makes this legal. Crane's smile flickered but held. Alive, yes. Comfortable. That's negotiable. One of his riders let out a dry laugh. Lila stepped closer, pressing her shoulder against Amos, her voice barely audible. He won't stop at a signature. He'll bury us once he's finished. Amos kept his expression stony. And if I say no? Crane shrugged, brushing dust off his sleeve. Then the choice gets ugly. Don't force me to prove unpleasant truths. His eyes slid back to the box. Hungry. Amos crouched and fit the key they'd found into the first lock. The iron teeth turned with a scrape that echoed against the hushed field. A heavy click answered, and the first of 3 bolts snapped free. Lila's chest tight. The second lock, however, bore a dial, and the third a twin slot meant for a key not yet found. Crane's breath caught, his certainty punctured. Go on, he ordered, stepping closer. Amos lifted his hand from the dial. That's as far as this key goes. The rest requires combination. Then give them to me, Crane barked. His mask slipped, temper leaking. Lila shook her head. He doesn't know them, she said, and the truth was in her steady voice. Amos leaned into the silence, savoring the leverage. Ezekiel planned, you think a man who spent decades hiding millions would leave the locks simple? He left trails for us, not for men who sniff profit. Crane's jaw tightened. He snapped his fingers, and 2 riders advanced, rifles rising. Amos spread his hands showing empty palms. Shoot me, and you'll never open it. The law won't let you auction what you can't prove, and you know it. Crane motioned his men to pause, calculating. 60-40. Last offer. Don't mistake this for kindness. Amos studied him. Kindness? You bring ropes and that's not partnership. That's pre-dug graves. The desert wind sharpened, carrying grit across their faces, making the men squint. Crane held his ground, though sweat marked the rim of his collar. You underestimate my patience, farmer. I can sit here all night, all week, until thirst forces you to deal. Lila held the journal tighter beneath her arm, whispering so only Amos could hear. He'll bleed us dry, Ezekiel warned about men like this. Amos nodded faintly, then louder so every ear caught it. What would you risk for your family's future? Share in the comments. His voice rang clear into the heavy dusk. Not just a question for Lila, but for anyone listening in a wider sense. As if Ezekiel himself leaned from the page, Crane stepped closer, rage barely leashed. Enough games, open it, sign and live wealthy. Refuse and you won't leave this ranch. Amos knelt again, fingers brushing the dial, letting time stretch. Behind Crane's shoulder, the horizon pulsed with faint sound. A steady beat, rhythmic, growing clearer. Lila cocked her head, eyes widening. Hoofbeats, she whispered. Scout barked sharply, bounding 2 steps forward, then back, tail rigid. The riders turned, shading their eyes against the blood-colored light. Dust plumes swirled anew from the west. More horsemen, but not Cranes. The sound rolled like thunder against hard ground. Crane's poise fractured. Who's that? He demanded, scanning the ridge. Amos allowed a thin smile. Maybe Ezekiel's protection wasn't just word. The hoofbeats grew nearer, carrying echoes of bridles and calls. Crane barked orders to his men, who swung rifles outward, forming a wary perimeter. Amos leaned close to Lila. Stay ready. This game isn't finished. The sun's edge dipped below the ridge, throwing the cedar into long shadow, the box still half buried at its roots, secrets locked within. Crane's voice cracked with anger now. If those riders interfere, they'll regret it. I don't leave empty-handed. Amos stood tall, shoulders squared against the encircling guns. His words calm but hard as stone. You've chased ghosts for years, Crane, but ghosts choose who they speak to, and you're not chosen. The hoofbeats thundered louder, dust clouds swelling, the promise of rescue, or another storm, riding fast out of the Nevada twilight. Crane's men shifted nervously, fingers twitching on triggers, eyes darting between the red sky and the stubborn farmer, who refused to bend. Lila's heart raced, but she clutched the journal like a lifeline, knowing every word inside was meant for this moment. The cedar groaned in the wind, coins of light flickering through its branches, as if secrets themselves stirred. And with riders cresting the hill, the balance of power began to tilt. The trap Crane had laid was trembling, the future waiting to be claimed, not by greed but by resolve. Riders poured over the ridge and split along the fence, badges catching the last red wash of day. Territorial marshals, a woman in a dark duster called, I'm Marshal Eliza Kane. Weapons down, hands high, back away from that family. The cedar's shadow ran between the groups like a drawn line. Victor Crane straightened, his smile cut thin. This is private business, he said. You don't belong here. Kane's reply was flat. You brought rifles to a negotiation on their land. That makes it ours. A rider on Crane's left fired too soon. The shot chipped a porch post. The marshals answered in controlled bursts that cracked stirrups and tore dust in front of hooves. Down, Kane shouted as splinters ticked from the cedar. Amos pulled Lila behind the trunk and held her there, shoulder hard against bark that smelled of resin. Bullets hissed past. Dirt hopped in dry puffs around their boots. I've got you, he said. Kane advanced in short dashes, using troughs and warped boards for cover. Her sidearm tapped a rhythm that clipped pride, not flesh. Crane's hat flew into the dust. Deputies took angles that stole the road. 2 riders threw rifles down. The rest hesitated, eyes jumping between authority and paymaster. Stand down, Victor, Kane called. No one needs to bleed for your contract. Crane jabbed a finger at the steel box half-freed at the cedar's base. That crate holds stolen wealth, he shouted. Horizon filed on this for years. We have a claim. Kane stayed in the open, pistol steady. You have hunger and paper. They have blood and a deed. Crane snatched a fallen carbine and fired toward the tree. Bark spat. Amos tightened around Lila. Chips stung his cheek. Kane's pistol cracked once. The carbine skidded from Crane's hands. Deputies swarmed, taking him down clean, wrists cuffed, knees in dust. Rifles hit the ground. In the quiet, the yard exhaled heat. Cooling metal pinged. Wind pushed a colder current from the ridge. Kane holstered and waved a medic to check the grazes. She stopped 2 paces off, giving space like a habit. You must be Amos Reed, she said. He rose, keeping Lila close. I am. She tipped her brim. Eliza Kane, we expected movement here. Afternoon. Lila frowned. How? Kane pointed to a chipped ceramic insulator on a porch post. A thin wire ran from it into a hole bored through an old plank. Your relative rigged a warning circuit. When a door goes wide after long quiet, a signal rides that wire to my office. We saddled as soon as it blinked. She let that settle. Ezekiel hired my security firm 15 years ago, she continued. He prepaid fuel, riders, and legal retainers. He didn't trust alarms that depend on luck. He trusted people. Lila slid the journal free and found the page boxed in charcoal. She tipped it toward a lantern. A sentence stood out. The protection is human, not machine. Lila met Kane's eye. He was direct. He was careful, Kane said. 2 deputies hauled Crane upright and steered him toward a truck. He twisted, voice sour. You can't arrest me for business. Kane didn't change. Victor Crane, you're under arrest for attempted robbery, conspiracy, brandishing, and reckless discharge of a firearm. You'll have counsel. You won't have control. Amos brushed bark dust from Lila's hair and faced the marshal. Thank you, Thank Ezekiel, she replied, reaching into her coat. She drew out a thick envelope sealed with wax pressed over a cedar sprig and placed it in Amos's hands like something that could bruise. He left this for today. Amos broke the hand inside matched the journal's loops, tidier than field notes. He read aloud, Amos, Miriam's boy, if this finds you. The line worked. I left a collection in pieces, so no thief could swallow it whole. The appraisals stand at $147 million. The strongbox key you need sits in your mother's jewelry case. I arranged a courier to deliver that case to your farm when the wire woke. Marshal Kane has the voucher. He read on. You'll be tempted by fast signatures. Read none alone. Every lock has more than one answer. The cedar is the heart. The protection I bought is human, not machine. Go slow. What can be sold should be sold clean. What must be kept should be kept together. Lila's fingers tightened on his sleeve. He thought past today, she whispered. Past us. That's the point. Kane's coins glitter. Planning carries. Lila realized the real treasure wasn't gold at all. It was Ezekiel's planning. Careful, stubborn, and loyal forever. She glanced toward the fence, where Marshall's log serial numbers scratched into seized gun. We'll take Crane to the county holding tonight. At dawn we'll begin lawful cataloging and guard the marked sites on your map. Amos looked at the box. One lock hung open. The dial and a twin keyway waited. Numbers on the face caught the lantern light, like a tiny sky. We leave it until the key arrives, he said. Lila nodded, sliding the journal into her jacket. Piece by piece, just as he wanted. Engines grumbled awake. Headlights painted white lanes and swung toward the road. Doors thumped. Radios clicked. Dust rose and flattened into the dark. 2 marshals stayed, settling near the porch with thermoses and jerky. Scout drank and stretched beside the step, a sigh unspooling from his ribs. Night came in layers. Heat bled from the boards. The horizon cooled to indigo. Crickets stitched a thread through the quiet. 1 star pricked above the ridge. Then another. Then a spill. The barn creaked and rested. The cedar moved in a small wind and whispered like a voice that loved them once and still did. Kane unrolled a field map on the step and tapped the cedar's symbol. Perimeter until dawn, she said. If anyone returns, they meet numbers again. She handed Amos a canteen and a bar pretending to be chocolate. Hunger found him mid-chew. Lila read the letter again by lantern glow, then folded it and tucked it away as if returning something living to its home. Tomorrow we meet the courier, Kane said. We'll open the box with witnesses, photograph every piece, log marks, then call dealers who don't smell like traps. You'll make the calls with me. Lila nodded.
Amos felt steadiness rising that wasn't bravado, just balance returning. He squeezed Lila's hand. We'll do it right. They sat quietly and let it clean the place. Amos thought of Miriam checking latches twice and humming when storms hit the roof. He felt that care settle into the Lila's head found his shoulder and stayed. We'll be okay, she murmured. For once he believed it. Above them more stars gathered, unhurried and bright. The desert, relieved of heat, smelled of sage, iron and old wood. The porch no longer felt like a witness to ruin. It felt like a threshold. Down the lane the last engine noise dissolved. Behind them the box waited, a promise built to outlast greed. And under that wide sky a father, a daughter and a marshal shared the kind of quiet that makes tomorrow possible.
Marshal Eliza Kane set 2 lanterns on the porch rail, while deputies spread into a loose ring, their horses tied and their eyes on the dark, and Amos steadied the safe dial as Lila held Ezekiel's journal open. Where charcoal smudges framed neat numbers, the Nevada night had cooled to velvet, scented with resin and iron, and even a cricket's trill seemed loud enough to mark time. He turned the wheel through a sequence the journal hinted at, listening for the faint kiss of tumblers. A click answered, the bar lifted, and a hush swept the yard as if the land itself paused to watch. Lila passed him the iron key. It slid into the twin slot, scraped and gave, and Kane leaned in with a torch that painted warm breath across metal. Slow and steady, she said, voice level. Amos raised the lid with both hands until stale air rolled out, cool and metallic, carrying a hint of old oil. Torchlight washed the interior, and what lay inside glinted like bottled starlight. Trays, tubes, cloth rolls, and a shallow wooden rack fitted with wells that cradled coins so clean they looked newly struck. On the top layer, 13 gold pieces sat sealed in clear capsules, Liberty striding forward under the date 1933. Double eagles famous enough to have their own myths. Beneath them, neat rows of silver showed winged heads. 1916 D Mercury dimes with mint marks as sharp as a fresh chisel. Between layers rested a canvas notebook, its pages filled with a list of trusted dealers, auction houses that handled provenance without games, counsel for filings, and careful notes on consignments, so taxes would not devour the future. Kane's torch flickered, and the coins answered not with a blunt shine but with a living gleam that shifted like breath, and for a moment the yard felt charged as if some long circuit had finally closed. Amos touched a capsule with his knuckle and drew back, unwilling to smudge a surface that had outlasted drought, greed, and grief. Under the rack lay a newer map than the waxed sheet from the porch tin. Lines radiated from the cedar like spokes, each ending in a little box labeled with a symbol and a number. 11 more sites, Lila whispered, counting, and he echoed the number in a tone that mixed relief with gravity. Ezekiel's earlier totals had already reached 147 million, and that ring of markers promised a fortune that could climb far beyond any ledger that had ever threatened their home. Kane scanned the notebook, nodded at names she recognized from guard work, and set it back where she found it. No shortcuts, she said. We call only the people he trusted. Lila moved to the cedar and lifted the torch just above the carved heart that bound DH and MR. She found tiny grooves almost hidden by resin, 3 sequences cut with a careful hand. Miriam's birthday sat there as 03-15-52 beneath it, Amos's date, 08-23-78, and below that his wedding, 06-12-03. The numerals aligned with dots that matched the dial's index marks. Combinations, she said, smiling, and he swallowed because the bark felt like his mother's palm guiding him from years away. He imagined Miriam whispering those numbers while the knife bit cleanly, trusting wind and time to guard them until the right eyes returned. He lifted a cloth roll and loosened its ribbon. Dozens of gold pieces slid into view, each sleeved and labeled by mint and year, their edges warm as a small sunrise. Packets sealed with wax pressed over a cedar sprig held documents that tracked ownership from vault to private hand, to this hidden bank, with photographs on black velvet and appraisals stamped by firms that answered the phone at odd hours. A leather envelope tucked along the side contained contacts for insurance and discreet transport, along with a reminder written twice: sell nothing alone, sell a group that tells a story. Gratitude rose with sorrow, because every instruction felt like a ladder out of a hole, and every rung reminded Amos of talks he never had with Miriam. Afternoons when she stared past the field and kept quiet about a brother who moved like a rumor through county files. Kane closed the lid halfway while deputies shifted the lanterns to hide direct gleams from distant eyes. Even victory needed shade. Scout curled under the porch step with his nose toward the road, chest moving in a slow guard rhythm. Coils of rope still lay where Crane's crew abandoned them, and burlap sacks slumped by the rail like sleeping threats. Proof that danger had not vanished, only stepped back a few paces. Will they try again? Lila asked,
Men who chase legends don't fold after one arrest. Keynes, they send someone smoother, or Sue. We'll be ready and so will you. Heat bled out of the boards. Stars gathered until the horizon looked dusted with frost. Fence wire grew a faint halo. The air lost its sting and gained a clarity that made their breaths sound like pages turning. The coins answered the torch in tiny pulses, a soft blaze that felt less like wealth than proof that planning can outlast hunger. Amos folded the newer map and slid it into the satchel with the journal, then looked at the cedar again and saw faint lines running outward like veins. He pictured a younger Miriam and a stubborn Ezekiel taking turns at the trunk, quiet, precise, bound by a promise to a boy who had not yet learned how heavy debt feels. Love, he thought, can be patient as geology and twice as strong. Lila balanced a capsule on her palm and studied Liberty striding past the tiny ear. That figure seemed to be walking straight out of worry into open space. She put it back carefully, then smiled without apology because for the first time in months, the future looked like something she could plan instead of chase. Amos laughed once, not from humor but from release, as if a wire around his ribs had finally been cut. He wanted to sprint down every spoke on the map and drag up every cache before dawn. Then Ezekiel's counsel rang in his head. Go slow, keep proof, keep witnesses. Cain read the impulse in his eyes. Tomorrow we open another site with photographs and 2 notaries. Tonight we lock this, she said. He turned the dial through numbers that matched the dates in the bark. Miriam's, then his own, then the wedding day spoken under a kinder sky, and each sequence answered with the firm slide of a bolt. They lifted the crate with a jack and a sled made from a pantry door, hauled it to the barn and covered it with canvas that smelled of hay and sunlight from years when the place still swung with work. Deputies logged the time and location, signed beside each other's names and posted a watch under the eaves. Back at the tree, Lila pressed her palm to the ridged bark. Coolness seeped into her skin, and the wood seemed to drink the night. Thank you, she whispered, not specifying who deserved it because the list was long. Amos joined her and wondered which stories Miriam had saved and which she had given to the soil, trusting a late harvest to rescue more than a season. Past the fence, a coyote called. Silence returned like a quilt. The world felt possible again, yet also fragile like glass that can take one more heat cycle and then shatter if mishandled. Lila took one last look at the coils and the sacks, and she didn't mistake their meaning. Even with badges nearby, risk still crouched. We move smart, she said. We move as if someone is always watching. Cain's smile was small and real. That is how you keep treasure from turning into trouble. Lantern flames settled to a steady pulse. Moths traced careful figure eights around glass. The wind lifted and fell. The cedar answered with a hush like a letter folding closed. Amos drew a blanket around Lila's shoulders and felt her lean lighter than that afternoon, heavier with responsibility. When they stepped away from the roots and crossed toward the porch, Amos glanced back and saw the tray in his mind, coins resting in their wells like small suns. Not just money but proof that someone believed in rescue and built it patiently. He carried that belief as a man carries water in canyon country, careful with every drop, steady over rock, grateful for the weight that saves, and aware that in the dark sage beyond the fence, Crane's ambition still prowled, thwarted for now yet stubborn as drought, waiting for a crack in judgment or a lapse in watch. Under that awareness, hope glowed anyway, quiet and real because the box had opened, the dates were true, and a mother's private math had become a lantern no wind could snuff.
First light broke over the Nevada plain with a soft, burnished glow, turning the horizon into a line of fire against the cooling blue. The ranch no longer looked like a ruin, but a threshold. Amos Reed stood at the cedar tree with Lila close by, watching Cain's deputies work in coordinated silence. They had opened 2 more vaults through the night, each packed with catalog trays and bundles that smelled of metal and cedar oil. Every box had been sealed with wax and initials, every coin wrapped with notes that told where it came from, who sold it, and what value it carried when last checked. Lila handled one envelope and read dates aloud. 1927, 1955, 1974, as if each was a mile marker on a secret road Ezekiel had paved. Amos bent over the crates with care. He wasn't hiding treasure, he murmured. He was preserving order. Cain nodded, flipping a ledger open with gloved hands. He funded us for more than your protection. Ezekiel paid to track men like Crane, to log companies that hunted estates. He wanted to cut them off before they reached other families. She handed Amos a packet stamped with court seals. He even kept appraisals current. The man thought decades ahead. The jewelry case arrived near mid-morning, delivered by a deputy who rode out before dawn. It was Miriam's, the wood-polished hinges clean despite its age. Amos set it on the porch rail and touched it with both hands before opening it. Inside, wrapped in soft cloth, lay the strongbox key, Ezekiel promised, along with appraisal sheets that listed totals in ink so precise, it looked printed. One figure sat at the bottom of the page, 147th. Lila's breath caught. All this time, she whispered. He carried the future in silence. They used the key on the central strongbox stored in the barn. With Cain and 2 notaries watching, Amos slid the iron teeth into place, turned and felt the bolt ease. The lid rose to reveal stacks of gold coins and sleeves, each labeled by mint and date, with certificates tucked between. Light from a lantern struck one roll of double eagles, and the edges glowed like cut amber. Lila grinned through tears. It's like holding sunlight. Cain said, every vault we find will be documented. Every piece is transferred under the law. Horizon's claim died with Crane's arrest. The deputy passed Amos a telegram confirming the trial date. Crane had already been charged with robbery, conspiracy, and attempted fraud. A conviction carried 35 years. Amos read the words slowly, then folded the page. Justice isn't quick, he said, but it landed where it should. The Nevada dawn lifted higher, spilling golden light across barren hills. Sage glistened with dew that had not shown itself in weeks. The barn roof shone with soft color, and the farmhouse wore shadows like paint, no longer broken but waiting for repair. Lila stood with her hands on her hips, shoulders squared. We'll clear debts, we'll buy new land, and we'll bring neighbors in to work it. We'll build something that lasts. Amos smiled at her resolve, the same determination Miriam once carried. What legacy would you build for your loved ones? Tell us below, she said, her voice carrying into the open space, as if Ezekiel might still be listening. Through the day, Cain's team cataloged each site the map revealed. They unearthed sealed tins, steel boxes, and even a clay jar that held silver folded in waxed cloth. Each piece was logged, photographed, and then sealed again for transport. Amos walked each dig with Lila, letting her place her hand first on every container. This is yours as much as mine, he told her. She laughed once, bright against the solemn work. It feels like Ezekiel left a puzzle for us to finish. The weight of years lifted as the numbers added up. Debts that had once bent Amos at the waist would vanish with a single auction. Tractors could be bought without loans, and land could be cleared and seeded without creditors knocking at the door. He saw a new farmhouse standing where the sagging one leaned, and in its windows, Lila moving with books under her arm, free to learn without worry. He told her, your mother would be proud of the woman you're becoming. Lila pressed her hand into his, and whispered, and of the man you chose to be. By evening, when the last vault was marked for escort, the marshals gathered near the cedar for a final tally. Cain set her hand on the trunk. Ezekiel's foresight gave you wealth, she said, but more than that, it gave you protection and time. Few inherit both. Amos felt the words sink in. We'll use it right, he answered. As the sun lowered, the land softened under lavender light. Coyotes yipped far off, and stars pricked through the fading sky. The yard smelled of fresh earth, where shovels had turned soil. For the first time in years, Amos didn't measure tomorrow in threat. He saw it in plans: new land, hired help, neighbors brought into work, fields tilled straight, debts erased. He thought of Miriam's careful hands and Ezekiel's relentless notes. Love written not in letters but in coins, buried safely for the right moment. Lila leaned against him, her eyes wide toward the horizon. We'll have horses, she said, and cattle, and we'll rebuild. I'll study agriculture so I can run it myself one day. Not just for us, but for the people around us. Her certainty carried the weight of a vow. The marshals finished packing, trucks rumbled awake, and dust rose, backlit by the last color of dusk. Cain tipped her brim to father and daughter. We'll see you at the sale, she said. Until then, rest easy. You've earned it. When silence returned, Amos and Lila stood under the cedar's shadow, the journal safe in her arms. The strongbox locked again with Ezekiel's key. Scouts circled twice and lay at their feet, nose on his paws. Above them, stars spilled bright and endless. For the first time, Amos felt no fear in the night, only gratitude. The desert had not softened. It was still hard and bare, but now it held promise. And in that promise, father and daughter understood the weight of inherit. Not only gold and silver, not only numbers on appraisals, but a plan laid with care, a shield raised long before they knew they needed it. Amos breathed deep and said, tomorrow we start building, not surviving. Lila smiled, eyes shining in starlight, and the ranch, once broken, felt alive again, carrying the legacy forward into a dawn that would not be lost. 6 months later, the Nevada horizon stretched wider than memory. 3,000 acres of new land running from low hills to silver sage flats. Every fence post freshly planted, every gate swinging true. Amos Reed stood at the porch rail of a solid new ranch house. Cedar beams cut from Oregon, roof shining with fresh tin. Morning sun spilled across the plain, laying long shadows that looked less like burdens and more like milestones. The air smelled of cut hay and damp earth from a newly dug irrigation ditch. Lila, taller now, 17 and bright with a kind of confidence that could not be borrowed, walked the corral with a clipboard, her braids swinging against her back. Two rescue horses nosed the rails and whickered for her hand. She called their names and promised oats, her voice carrying as easily as the wind. Amos watched her with a quiet pride that filled more than the house behind him. The sale of Ezekiel's collection had cleared every debt, replaced ruin with abundance, and given space for generosity. He had hired 6 struggling neighbors within the first month, men and women who once faced foreclosure and now earned wages steady enough to pay school fees and keep food on tables. One family lived in the guest house rent-free until they could find their footing. Another used his equipment to plant barley on a parcel he'd nearly lost. Amos said often, "A ranch this size is nothing without people," and he meant it. The barn rebuilt with stone footings now shelters cattle bought from 3 counties. Lila insisted on rescue stock first, animals abandoned by owners who could no longer feed them. She cared for them with a patience learned from nights of uncertainty. She told her father she wanted to study agriculture at university, not just to keep their land but to improve it, to bring in methods that could outlast droughts and rising costs. Amos supported her dreams, saying, "Books will carry you further than luck. Go learn, then bring it back." Marshal Eliza Kane visited often, usually arriving at dusk when the horizon burned orange. On this morning she leaned against a truck hood, boots crossed, and reported news that sealed the circle. "Crane's organization is gone," she said, eyes sharp beneath her brim. "Federal seizures hit accounts across 3 states. 400 million in stolen collections recovered. What you suffered was part of a larger sickness. It's over now." Amos let the words sink into him like rain. "Justice has its own season," he said. Kane tipped her hat toward Lila. "And this land will outlast it all." They walked the fields together, Kane marveling at irrigation ditches lined with stone, windmills spinning clean, and young cottonwoods planted along a stream bed. Lila explained the crop rotations she wanted to test: alfalfa to replenish soil, barley for market, and sections set aside for grazing. She spoke with the fire of someone who had seen the edge of loss, and now wanted growth to be permanent. Kane listened, smiling. "Your uncle Ezekiel planned for heirs," she said, "but you're building beyond his imagining." Amos carried his thoughts deeper. At night he often sat by the cedar planted near their new house, a cutting from the old tree, remembering Miriam's voice, her laughter in hard years, the way she had hidden secrets inside silence. He thought of Ezekiel, whose planning stretched across decades, who trusted people like Cain to guard what could not guard itself. Their love had become more than memory. It had become a structure as strong as the barns he built and as lasting as the coins that once gleamed in torchlight. Neighbors came on Sundays with food and stories, filling the porch with laughter. Children ran across the yard, chasing Scout, who had grown slower but still barked at shadows in the sage. Lila took the younger ones to see foals in the pasture, teaching them to keep palms flat when feeding apples. Amos grilled meat under a sky so wide it swallowed worry. Where once he had counted dollars down to the last 12, he now counted blessings measured not in coins but in people fed, debts lifted, futures restored. One evening he opened the journal again and read Ezekiel's final note, the one they had overlooked in their rush. It said simply, "Wealth is a tool, legacy is a bridge. Choose which one to build." Amos folded it and placed it beside Miriam's photograph. He whispered, "We're building the bridge." The ranch thrived not just because of money, but because of intention. Every coin had been sold clean, every transfer recorded, every debt paid with proof. Auctions drew headlines and buyers marveled at provenance that read like a sod. Yet Amos turned down offers for interviews, saying the story belonged to Lila and the land. As dawn rose higher on this 6-month morning, golden light spilled over the barren hills, painting them alive again. Amos and Lila stood together on the porch, shoulders touching, both looking out at herds moving slowly in the cool. She said, "I used to wonder if we'd ever breathe without counting the cost. Now I know we can." He answered, "We paid the cost already. Now we grow." Kane drove away with a wave, her silhouette shrinking into dust that glittered in sunlight. Amos tightened an arm around his daughter. "The legacy isn't just theirs," he said. "It's ours now. We guard it, we grow it, we pass it." Lila smiled, her eyes reflecting the morning like mirrors of the sky. She saw beyond cattle and crops into decades of stewardship. "I'll carry it," she promised. Amos nodded, knowing she already did. And to those listening, to every witness drawn into their story, The words carried further than the ranch fence. Love this tale of secrets and triumph? Click the video on your screen for another jaw-dropping story. Subscribe and drop a super chat to keep these adventures coming. Your support fuels our storytelling.